happens to be Israeli Apartheid Week, or really what has become Israeli Apartheid Month, where Students for Justice in Palestine and other organizations are educating their peers on campus about Israel's violations of the rights of Palestinians and the Palestinian struggle for those rights. And inevitably, these efforts, which I'll say more about, are generating a really strong backlash, a really repressive backlash on some campuses trying to silence and shut down the work that students are doing. And you've experienced this to some extent here at Rutgers in New Brunswick. Just a few months ago, last fall, SJP here was put under investigation after members distributed mock eviction notices. Who knows what a mock eviction notice is? Who heard about that issue here at Rutgers? That's quite a few people, but for those who hadn't heard of it, this is a tactic that students have been using all over the country to educate campuses where, they want to bring some of the reality, albeit in a symbolic way, to campus of what Palestinians go through. So since 1967, Israel has demolished 27,000 Palestinian homes. And these demolitions are going on. And they're going on in the context of Israel's relentless theft of Palestinian land to build illegal Israeli settlements. And many Palestinians are made homeless. And this is happening in Jerusalem. It's a continuation of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So sometimes families, Palestinian families, in fact almost every night, the Israeli army is raiding villages around the occupied West Bank and giving families eviction notices or demolition notices saying, you have to get out of your house or you have to get off this land. We're going to demolish your home. We're going to take it. And so these mock eviction notices are simply flyers which lay out these facts, and they are just that. They're not real eviction notices. They're mock eviction notices just so students will see what life is like for Palestinians. So I actually have here, you wouldn't be able to see it because it's too small, the mock eviction notice that was distributed here at Rutgers. And it said, it just lays out the facts that this may seem like unrealistically harsh treatment. It says, eviction notice, we regret to inform you that your suite is scheduled for demolition in the next 3 days. If you do not vacate the premise within this time frame, we reserve the right to destroy all your remaining belongings. But then it says that it's fake, that they're just trying to dramatize what real life is like for Palestinians. It's a stunt. It's a way to get people's attention. So what happened at Rutgers is that there were complaints which turned out to be completely false. They were investigated by the university, that these notices had specifically targeted Jewish students. That wasn't true. But this is a diverse campus, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. And so, of course, there are Jewish students, and so they might have got some notices just like everyone else under the door of their dorm room. The university actually said, because I asked them and they sent me a statement at the time, that the notices were distributed randomly. It was simply untrue that Jewish students had been targeted. But the claim was made by Hillel, a nationwide organization with chapters on campus, whose main purpose seems to be to advocate against Palestinian rights. And they made this claim that these notices, which are fake and are simply informing students about what is going on in real life for Palestinians, made Jewish students on campus feel unsafe. Now, I think we have to take that very seriously, because what does it mean when an organization claims that if a Jewish student is informed about the facts of what Israel is actually doing to Palestinians that they feel offended or unsafe. I think that that makes a very biased assumption that all Jewish students identify with Israel and that all Jewish students are somehow responsible for or associated with what Israel does, which is absolutely false, and I would even go as far as to say it's anti-Semitic. It's anti-Semitic to assume that someone is offended by accurate facts about Israel just because they're Jewish. But that's the claim that Hillel made. And the reason I am going into this detail about what happened at Rutgers is because at the time, and this was last October, one of the rabbis associated with Hillel, Rabbi Akiva David Weiss, said something that I really talk about in the book, which is that we have a free speech emergency on campuses when it comes to Israel. And what happened at Northeastern University is a precedent. I think the fact that Hillel had called for Rutgers SJP to be banned, to be disbanded, indicates that this is a goal, of organizations like Hillel, which is to get Students for Justice in Palestine shut down. And I want to draw your attention to the action alert put out by Northeastern SJP, calling on people everywhere, but especially other SJPs, to show solidarity, to send them letters, and to contact President Joseph Aoun of Northeastern University and let the administration there know that this is outrageous. This attack on free speech is absolutely unacceptable. And some good news came today that the university has apparently backed off from the threats to possibly expel the two students. But that doesn't mean the crisis is over, because the SJP is still banned. And if they get away with this, then maybe next time it will happen at Rutgers. And so it's really important to stand up against it and stand together against it. Now, one implication of this is I'm scheduled. It's of course, to me, what's happening to the students is the main thing, what they're being put through. But right now, I'm scheduled on April 1st to be at Northeastern. And right now, I don't know what this means. When a student organization is banned, it means they can't book a room. They can't get funding to have an event. So does that mean that I have been banned from Northeastern University now? Does that mean that it's impossible to have speakers to come on campus to tell the truth about what's happening in Palestine? It's this serious. And in the book, I talk about why this is happening. It's happening because Israel and pro-Israel organizations in this country have decided, they actually say the following. I quote from an organization called the David Project. This is a major pro-Israel organization that focuses on suppressing Palestine solidarity activism on campus. And they published a kind of a strategic paper in 2012 where they, in a sense, laid out their battle plan. And I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs from the book that kind of give you a context for the discussion that we're going to have. And just before I do that, a little bit more context. In 2010, a think tank in Israel that's very close to the Israeli government and military called the Reut Institute. The name's not important, it's in the book. But what is important is that this think tank put forward a plan. And they said that Israel faces a threat that is almost more dangerous than missiles, more dangerous than Iran. We know that Iran actually has no nuclear weapons despite the Israeli propaganda. But in the minds of Israelis and in the propaganda that's fed to the Israeli public, Iran is this huge danger. So they're saying this is as big as Iran. It's the existential threat to Israel from the growing global Palestine solidarity movement. And we have to move to stop it. The words they used is we need to sabotage and attack it. We have to name and shame and discredit the organizations and even the individuals who are in this movement. And in the book I outline how millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, have been devoted to this effort by groups like, something called the Israel Action Network, which was set up by the Jewish Federations of North America, by a group called Stand With Us that works very closely with the Israeli government, and a whole host of other groups. And Hillel, at the national level, is very involved in that. And 4 years in, the BDS movement is bigger than ever. So in one sense you can say they failed. But on the other hand, we can see that these organizations, with the banning of Northeastern SJP, with the censorship going on at Columbia University right now during Israeli Apartheid Week, and other cases around the country, that the effort to stop people talking about Palestine on campus is really intense. So I'll read this little bit. American public support for Israel remains strong, but the growing cracks in that support are most evident on campus, according to the David Project. And universities across America form, quote, the leading venue for anti-Israel activity and the spread of anti-Israelism. The case for working to stop this dangerous trend is clear. According to the David Project, universities are not only where the thinking of America's future political leaders is molded, but also where the worldview of a large swath of influential people outside of the political class, as well as the population at large, is formed. These warnings are contained in the David Project's 2012 white paper, A Burning Campus, Rethinking Israel Advocacy at America's Universities and Colleges. This document can be seen as the university-focused counterpart of the Reut Institute's blueprint for suppressing Palestine solidarity activism and criticism of Israel more broadly. The David Project, a $4 million per year organization focusing on Zionist advocacy on campuses, was founded in 2002 and became notorious in the early 2000s for its witch hunt against Columbia University professor Joseph Meshat, as well as its aggressively Islamophobic rhetoric. Incidentally, the founder of the David Project is the person behind the group that has been relentlessly harassing Northeastern University, and a guy called Charles Jacobs, who is not only virulently anti-Palestinian, but very openly Islamophobic as well. The white paper criticizes earlier approaches to suppressing Palestine solidarity activism and academic inquiry related to Israel on campus, and lays out a new framework. The old approach involved confronting and debating. The new strategy, directly inspired by the Reut Institute report, which I just talked about, emphasizes making friends and influencing people. Surprisingly, the paper demolishes the notion, long promoted by Zionist groups, that American college campuses are rife with anti-Semitism. Most American campuses are not hostile environments for most Jewish students, the paper acknowledges. Racial anti-Semitism of the kind most associated with the Nazis is not likely a serious problem on any American college campus. Claiming otherwise does not jive with the lived experience of many Jewish students who know they can identify as Jews and largely not suffer any. I have a chapter in here which is titled, Does Israel Have a Right to Exist as a Jewish State? I'm not going to give away the answer. I don't want to give away any plot spoilers. You'll have to read it and find out what the answer to that question is. However, the key points that I make are that Israel's demand to have a right to exist as a Jewish state and that Palestinians should accept it means that Palestinians should accept that it was legitimate for Palestinians to be expelled from their country in 1948, that it's legitimate for Israel to deny Palestinians the right to return to their country for one reason and one reason alone, which is that they're not Jewish, that it is legitimate for Israel to keep 1.7 million Palestinians caged up in Gaza, 80% of them refugees from areas that are now in Israel, solely because they're not Jewish, that it is legitimate for Israel to continue to discriminate against the 1.5 million Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, albeit second-class citizens. So you can actually have a very rational discussion about what it means in practice for Israel to claim that it has a right to exist as a Jewish state. And I argue that it means in practice recognizing that Israel has a right to be racist against Palestinians. What I'm telling you now, and what I write in the book, fits the David Project's definition of anti-Israelism and bigotry. To discuss the impact of Israel's policies on Palestinians, according to them, is bigotry. And how do we see this playing out? We see it playing out with what happened at Rutgers and what's happening now at Northeastern. That if you provide a flyer to people telling them the undeniable fact that 27,000 Palestinian homes have been demolished since 1967, that you're a bigot, and that you should be subjected to disciplinary proceedings, and that you should be brought up before the same kind of procedures that are rightly reserved for racist incidents, racist harassment, sexual harassment, and other forms of abuse that are unacceptable. The effort is to define criticism of Israel as bigotry for which you should be punished. This is why it's absolutely fundamental that we really stand up against this effort to shut down free speech. And another point I want to add on this, that my colleague Abe Greenhouse has made repeatedly, is that sometimes university administrations will say, well, you know, we can't ban people from speaking, but we acknowledge that what these Students for Justice in Palestine groups are saying is extreme and is offensive. But the mark of us as democratic societies is that we tolerate all sorts of horrible things. So even though these Palestinians and their supporters are saying horrible things, we good liberals must tolerate it because we're so tolerant. Did I get that right, Abe? Well, we have to absolutely resist this and be very forceful about who is saying the repugnant things. Because what Palestinians are advocating, and what Students for Justice in Palestine are advocating, and what the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement and those who support it are advocating, is fundamentally based in universal rights, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in recognizing the inherent worth and equality of all human beings. We are the ones defending liberal values. We are the ones defending human rights. And those who support Israel as a Jewish state, and those who support Zionism are the ones saying repugnant things. And let me give you an example of that. I'm not going to give you, although you can find them in the book, you can find examples of extreme Israeli racism against Palestinians. That's really ugly stuff. That's not what I'm going to read you. I'm going to read you something from the most mainstream, the most acceptable, the people, the kind of person you'll see on, on MSNBC and CNN every day. Has anyone ever heard of somebody called Peter Beinart? I'm happy to see very few of you have, because there's really no reason you should know who this guy is. What he says is not very interesting, and he's not interested in hearing from you. He doesn't really talk to Palestinians and those who support their rights. But he is notable because he wrote a book called The Crisis of Zionism a couple of years ago. And it got a lot of media and a lot of press. And his basic argument was that, the older generation of leaders of pro-Israel Jewish communal organizations in the United States, groups like the Anti-Defamation League, AIPAC, the American Jewish Committee, and so on, are really losing the younger generation of American Jews. Because, American Jews in this country, American Jewish communities, have been in the forefront of civil rights, always. They were in the forefront of the struggle against Jim Crow in this country. They've been staunch defenders of separation of church and state and protecting freedom of religion by preventing one religion from taking over the state, as many Christianist radicals in this country would like to see. But when it comes to Israel, the approach has largely been Israel right or wrong, and cheerleading for massacres when there was almost no dissent when Israel was massacring people in Gaza. Constant cheerleading. And so what Peter Beinart is saying is that young American Jews, just like young Americans of every background, when forced to choose between the kind of racism that they see in Israel and the pluralistic values that they grow up with in the United States, choose the pluralism. And they're not supporting Israel. And this is the crisis of Zionism. That is a very bold and even careless statement when we reflect on the enormity of what Palestinians continue to go through and what so many people in the region continue to go through, from Iraq to Syria to Palestine, Gaza, and with the brutal coup regime in Egypt as well. But what I mean there is that the Palestinians really are winning the argument in this country. And this country is the key in many respects, because Israel exists largely thanks to support from the United States and because of the United States' hegemonic or imperial role in the region. So I have to say I agree fundamentally with the David Project when they say that what is happening on campuses in this country is crucial to the future of what happens in Palestine and crucial to American support. What I also hope that this book offers is, well, for me it was very much a learning experience, that I had to understand in writing this book that American support for Israel, the ability of American politicians to tolerate and even celebrate Israel's violations of Palestinian rights, to celebrate and support Israeli, and push myself to be as empathetic as possible to the quote-unquote other side, to put myself in their shoes, and to see if I could build that bridge. And I stand by it. The reaction to it was exactly the same as, if I'm combative, is to call me an anti-Semite, and to say I want to destroy Israel, and I'm a terrorist, and to wish that I would blow myself up. These are things I hear every day in social media. So, in a sense, I feel you should say what you think. Say it with dignity. Say it with accuracy. Don't let them ruffle you. Don't let them set the agenda. But don't feel that you have to be shy about the truth. And the point you make about people wanting to dismiss what we say as noise, I hear that, and I think that's a problem. If this is seen as, a squabble between two ethnic groups or two religious groups, I think the reaction will be, we don't want anything to do with that. And it's been actually a deliberate strategy. Now, maybe you'll say I'm being combative again, but it's the truth, which is it's been a deliberate strategy of pro-Israel groups to try to present this issue as, it's a religious issue. Because the advantage for them is exactly that it turns other people off. And if it's an ancient religious issue that goes back thousands of years, then, nothing can be done. We'll just have to have dialogue groups and interfaith sessions and go on and on and on. But if people understand this as apartheid, as settler colonialism, as injustice of one group dominating another group of people, then something can be done. Now, probably many people in this room are too young to remember the campus divestment campaigns against South Africa, although I know that many of you have read and studied about it. I remember it. And I think that it's easy for us to think that, in hindsight, everybody must have supported sanctions against South Africa, right? Because who could possibly have been willing to collaborate with a white minority regime oppressing millions of black people? But the reality was, apartheid South Africa had a lot of support in the United States. The Reagan administration strongly opposed sanctions on South Africa. US corporations strongly opposed sanctions on South Africa. And you know what? They made all the same arguments people now make against sanctions, boycott, or divestment on Israel. They say, sanctions, BDS, it cuts off dialogue, hurts people's feelings. It hurts the people it's supposed to help. Because, Palestinians or they used to say black people at the time will lose jobs if companies withdraw from South Africa. That investment is good, that economic development helps everyone. These were all arguments that were made. Universities absolutely resisted divestment on South Africa. Students and faculty who supported them had to work really hard to get universities to divest from South Africa. There were no easy victories. And I think what's amazing is how much faster the BDS campaign targeting Israel has grown and how much more success it's had in a short time compared with South Africa. The first calls for boycott of South Africa were issued by black South Africans in the 1950s. But it took until the 1980s, 30 years, for it to become mainstream in Europe and the United States. The Palestinian campaign for boycott, divestment, and sanctions was launched in 2005. So we're talking about 8 years ago, and we're already getting incredible mainstream attention and traction. And one of the key goals of BDS is to change the discussion, to bring the focus back to Palestinian rights, and that is what's happening. So I don't want to make it sound like it's going to be easy. It's not. But it means something when Israeli ministers are saying this is the greatest threat Israel faces. Almost every day we're hearing about another European bank or pension fund pulling out of Israeli investments. So I think that in comparison with South Africa, we're doing well. I want to address one part of your question that's important. You mentioned Islamophobia. That somehow maybe it was more possible for people to be sympathetic to Africans than it is today for people to be sympathetic to Arabs and Muslims, Palestinians as Arabs and Muslims, because of the atmosphere is Islamophobia. Is that the concern I heard from you?
Yeah, I feel like Islamophobia is very prevalent nowadays.
Right.
And it's playing a big factor, especially in the past, since 2001. It's kind of like the best defense.
I agree.
It's baseless, but that's what you...
I agree with you. But here's the thing, and I address this directly in the book, is that the racism against black people in South Africa was very open here in the United States. That we shouldn't believe that, and in South Africa, the same kinds of arguments were made that sound like Islamophobia, that black people are uncivilized, that they treat each other badly, that they're not capable of democracy. All of these arguments were being made at the time and being made in the mainstream. So it's a fundamental characteristic of colonialism to dehumanize the victims of colonialism. So today, it's Islamophobia that's used to dehumanize Palestinians and others. But there was always a racist discourse against black people and Africans that was used openly to justify apartheid. So, in a sense, I think we can take some comfort from that, which is that despite the racism, that movement was still able to win a huge victory.
Website, which puts all these issues on display. I was just wondering if you could speak briefly as to the role that the media has played in all this. In particular, your work as well as the media, within Israel, the messages that they're projecting to their people, and vice versa.
I guess the challenge for us has always been, and thank you for mentioning the Electronic Intifada, our publication. I'm very fortunate to have amazing colleagues who make that publication happen every day. And it's been incredible over the past few years to watch our audience and our reach just grow exponentially. We can now, with some stories, with some single stories, we can reach hundreds of thousands of people. And with the recent stories on SodaStream and Scarlett Johansson and Oxfam, we were reaching hundreds of thousands of people with those stories and breaking through, setting the agenda for the mainstream. And the reason that we had to develop our own media is because still there's no opening for counter narratives or for our truth in the mainstream. I mean, every day, the New York Times is printing the most ridiculous things about Israel and Palestine. It's so unbelievably biased. But I think that the lesson I take is that we have the opportunity now to generate our own media, to be our own media, and actually not just to inform people directly, but to force the mainstream media to actually pay attention to things that they would rather ignore. So that's my reflection on it. I would say that in terms of Israeli media, in some ways it's true that in Israeli media you get more open discussion of these issues than you do in American media. However, I would say that Israeli media is still incredibly one-sided and very much operates in a sense as giving primarily the message that the Israeli government wants to give, just as our mainstream media does in this country. People refer to CNN as Pentagon television, and that's a good analogy also for Israeli media. So it's incredibly important still that we create and maintain our own media spaces while confronting mainstream media about their exclusion of other voices, who is involved in war crimes, not just in Palestine, that I detail in the book, in Lebanon, when Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006, carpet-bombed southern Beirut using cluster munitions, killed 1,200 people, and she called it the birth pangs of the new Middle East. Not to mention the hundreds of thousands, millions of lives destroyed in Iraq. But you know, it's really, I think, symptomatic of the collusion between university administrations and power in this country. And the universities follow the foreign policy of the United States. They follow it abroad as well. You have all these universities setting up branches around the world in some really repressive countries. But as long as these repressive countries are closely allied with the United States, they're okay. I'm talking about like the rush of universities to set up branches in some of the Gulf states. And what's really, you know, Sherry, you reminded me when I'm not going to advocate for what students should do, but a couple of years ago, and I write about this incident in the book, Ehud Olmert, the former Israeli Prime Minister, who led the massacre of Palestinians in Gaza in 2008-2009, was similarly honored at the University of Chicago, which is my alma mater, and they also gave him a huge honorarium, and he gave something called the leadership lecture. I mean, they were putting him forward as an example for students to follow. And we protested him. We disrupted his speech. I stood up and I disrupted his speech. And one after another, we stood up and we made it so he couldn't give that speech. And sometime later, when students did the same thing to Michael Oren, an Israeli army officer who was also the Israeli ambassador, they were actually put on trial in Orange County, California, for the protest they had at UC Irvine, and I write about that in the book. But in the book, I address a fundamental question. Because people say to me sometimes, they say, well, how can you sit there and complain about pro-Israel groups censoring people and shutting down free speech when you are willing to interrupt someone and not let them speak? And you know, and the University of Chicago accused us of shutting down free speech and not respecting academic freedom. Well, the answer to that, and I give it a bit more elegantly in the book, but I'm going to be blunt about it now. I don't give a hoot about what Ehud Olmert thinks. We were protesting his crimes. We were protesting the killings of 3,000 Palestinians and Lebanese. That is not a difference of opinion. We weren't protesting his thoughts or his writings or an op-ed he wrote. We were protesting his crimes. And when the justice system fails, when it goes after poor people and people of color with such lack of mercy that for the smallest crime you can go to jail for years or decades, but when people who kill thousands of people, who invade countries, who overthrow governments, as Condoleezza Rice did, are treated with honor, are rewarded for their crimes, then who is left to speak up against them, if not students? And that's something that the case I wanted to make, that we cannot allow them to reduce everything to, oh, it's just a different opinion. Our lives are not a difference of opinion. The lives of Iraqis are not a difference of opinion. So it's outrageous that Condoleezza Rice is coming here. And I hope that however you choose to do it, you will make it a memorable experience for her. By the way, she was invited to the University of Chicago sometime after Ehud Olmert. And when the university heard that protests were planned, her speech was mysteriously canceled at the University of Chicago.
I don't know if all of you know, but in the last 24 plus hours, 5 Palestinians have been killed by IDF soldiers. One of them was a student, 18-year-old at Birzeit University. And a lot of protests have been happening right after that. And I think this morning, or maybe would have been in the last few hours, 3 rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel. Within 15 seconds, Israel closed all of its checkpoints. There was a high security alert. And I just actually was on Facebook right now, and I saw that Israeli jets were, swarming over Gaza, and they had 29 targets, and they did airstrikes over the Gaza Strip. So what I want to know is that two questions. First of all, what do you think of, I'm assuming it's Hamas. I'm not sure whatever organization it was that fired these missiles or rockets into Israel. What do you think of that? And then secondly, I know Netanyahu took this vow that he's going to make sure he's going to, make a lot of noise in Gaza because there's a lot of noise in Israel. So what do you think of these two incidents?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really serious question, an important one. A little while ago, Netanyahu tweeted, if there won't be quiet in the south, there will be noise in Gaza, and this is an understatement. I reported that tweet as abuse because that is using Twitter to essentially make threats of violence and war crimes. And that's a violation of the terms of service. So I encourage people to report Netanyahu if you see him using Twitter to make threats like this. Okay, this photo on the cover of my book, this young man, I don't know his name. I'm expecting that someone on Facebook will figure out his name soon enough and tell him it's on the cover of my book, and maybe he'll be surprised. I don't know his name. But I do know when this photo was taken. It was taken in November 2012, after Israel had mercilessly bombed Gaza for a week, killing more than 170 Palestinians. And this young man and the people with him were in the streets celebrating because Israel had agreed to a ceasefire on Palestinian terms, which is to stop firing at Gaza and to stop carrying out so-called targeted killings, really extrajudicial executions in Gaza. And Palestinians celebrated that ceasefire as a victory because they could get a little bit of peace and quiet. Israel has, as is well documented, relentlessly violated the ceasefire in Gaza. Despite that, Israel itself has acknowledged that there has been very little response from Gaza, very few rockets fired from Gaza. In recent weeks, Israel has been escalating its attacks on Gaza. It has resumed very aggressively extrajudicial executions using drones to assassinate people. It has never stopped firing at Palestinian fishermen and firing at Palestinian farmers. I document that almost every month at the Electronic Intifada. There are reports from Oxfam and from OCHA, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which is part of the United Nations. They document all this firing on Gaza. And I think what happened today was the Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza, in this case it was the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, wanting to send a message to Israel that, look, we're capable of firing back. They said that they don't want to violate the ceasefire, they would like the ceasefire to be restored. I don't condone any time somebody fires anything towards civilians, whether those civilians are Israeli or Palestinian. The point is that historically, Israel has never abided by a ceasefire unless it's been forced to. And so if we want to end this constant violence, which always takes a much greater toll on Palestinians than Israelis, we have to ask why the so-called international community is doing nothing to prevent Israel from violating the ceasefire. Israel announced today that it closed the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is the only goods crossing into Gaza, as a result of the rockets that were fired in retaliation at Israel. What Israel is saying is that if you fire back at us, we will cut off your food supply. Using food as a weapon is a war crime, and that's what Israel's doing. They said that we're closing the Kerem Shalom crossing until further notice. So they're saying to 1.7 million people in Gaza, no food supplies are going to come in until we decide. And in the book I detail how Israel's siege has destroyed. Palestinians in Gaza used to grow much of their own food. They used to export 400,000 tons a year. They used to grow 400,000 tons a year of produce and export large amounts of it. They had surpluses to export. But Israel's siege has systematically destroyed the agriculture in Gaza and the economy in Gaza. So now Palestinians in Gaza are overwhelmingly dependent on food supplies coming in through one single gate, the Kerem Shalom crossing, and today Israel closed that gate. That's the reality. But how does this get reported in the media? That Palestinians are firing rockets and Israel is defending itself. And everything else is erased. And so I detail this in the book because I want you to have the tools to answer back against these distorted stories that are constantly reversing things. The reality is that Palestinians have respected the ceasefire and wanted to maintain it, and Israel has constantly violated.
Connect to it?
Yes, yes. There have been, in the past 48 hours, 10 Palestinians killed by Israel. One of them was a Palestinian Jordanian judge, shot dead at the Allenby Bridge crossing from Jordan. Another was a young 18-year-old called Saji Darwish, who was ambushed by Israeli soldiers for no apparent reason. Yesterday, Israel carried out the extrajudicial execution, it appears. It killed 3 members of Islamic Jihad, the group that fired the rockets today. Now again, I'm not saying that we accept or condone firing rockets towards Israeli civilians. I can never accept civilians being targeted or harmed by anyone, whether it's Palestinians or Israelis. The point I'm making is to understand the dynamics, that Israel knows that if it wants quiet, the way to have quiet is to end its violations of the ceasefire in Gaza. I suspect that's what Israel is being told privately by the United States and other countries that don't want to see this situation escalate further right now. But unfortunately, the Obama administration has never publicly criticized Israel, no matter how much it uses violence.